reported stronger than expected demand heading into the spring season despite higher fuel prices.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump insisting the US can break Iran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz without help from other countries.
Well, the US president insisted once again and criticized NATO allies' reluctance to answer to his call to send warships to the zone to escort commercial ships through, calling it a foolish mistake. Meanwhile, Iran is letting some tankers go through the waterway. Among those granted safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz were 2 Indian-flagged tankers carrying liquefied petroleum gas, which have now reached ports in Gujarat state, delivering over 92,000 metric tons of LPG. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said last week that he had spoken with Iran's president. However, New Delhi denies discussing the release of 3 Iranian tankers seized in February in exchange for securing safe passage for its own ships. India is the world's second largest importer of LPG or cooking gas and the 4th largest buyer of LNG, liquefied natural gas. Last week, the government imposed tighter controls on these commodities and has also been racing to diversify their sources. Let's take a listen.
Most of the LPG is coming from the Gulf. And recently, just 2 or 3 months back itself, our OMCs have, have started taking LPG from US. So government is putting all efforts to diversify the sources of LPG also.
And speaking of Donald Trump, he says the US will be doing something with Cuba very soon, a day after the island suffered another nationwide blackout.
Yeah, power is being restored across Cuba today as authorities have reconnected much of its ailing electrical grid. The country's largest oil-fired plant came back online on Tuesday as well. This as the Trump administration escalates its rhetoric against the communist regime. The two sides have opened talks to defuse the ongoing crisis amid deepening impact of the US's oil blockade. Luke Trago reports.
As a gloomy dawn broke across Cuba on Tuesday, much of the nation was still without electricity. Its power grid had completely collapsed for the 3rd time in 4 months the day before, leaving ordinary Cubans to endure yet again.
It affects practically everything. When it comes to cooking, you have to cook earlier because once night falls, well, you can imagine. The water, you can't use the pump to get water up to the roof.
I plan to face the day as usual, just as all Cubans do. This is our country, and we are proud of it despite the difficulties, because we know the blockade exists.
That blockade has all but cut Cuba off from oil shipments since January, when the United States attacked Cuban ally Venezuela and threatened any country providing Havana with the fuel it needs with trade tariffs. A pressure tactic from Washington, which has been pushing for regime change. Just 2 smaller vessels carrying oil have arrived since then, and while Cuba produces 40% of its petroleum and generates its own electricity, it's not enough to meet demand in a country where the power infrastructure is badly outdated and constantly on the point of collapse.
Cuba has survived on the kindness of strangers. It was first subsidized by the Soviet Union and then later subsidized by the governments of Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. That meant that they really didn't have to engage in the sort of upgrades that are necessary to keep an economy and electrical system running.
Seeking to relieve the economic pressure, Cuban authorities have announced moves making it easier for Cuban exiles to invest there, something so far roundly met with derision by those same exiles that fled the communist nation in the first place.
Finally, Yuka, let's change gears entirely. Here in Europe, there's a new boy in town when it comes to online shopping. Tell us more.
Yeah, we just can't have enough of those e-commerce platforms, can we? Well, even though we've been hearing a lot about the need to crack down on the likes of Shein and Temu, China's JD.com has launched a new online marketplace in France, Germany, the UK and 3 other European countries in a push to diversify beyond a soft domestic market and directly challenge Amazon's dominance. Luke Trago and our colleagues at France Télévisions tell us more.
Could this be the service to knock Amazon off its perch? Chinese e-commerce giant Joybuy thinks it's in with a chance to take the top spot, rolling out in Europe on Monday with a catalogue of products from toys to homewares, electronics and food. Reactions in France, though, have been mixed.
The idea of Chinese manufacture isn't exactly about respect for the environment or human rights.
I'm trying to buy less on these platforms. We've got a lot of shops in our area.
Parent company JD.com is relying on a model distributing quality products itself rather than just selling like Temu or Alibaba, unveiling major French brands at a showroom in Paris and more besides.
There are Chinese brands like DJI, which are real bestsellers over there, and leading brands like Samsung.
Joybuy is banking on building up its customers thanks to its robotic warehouses, 60 in France, to boost speed. The vendor is offering same-day delivery for orders before 11 a.m. and next-day service for orders after 11 p.m. and unlimited free deliveries for €3.99 a month.
Profitability will come through increasing sales volumes and customer numbers.
For one expert, though, there's a far more important aspect in taking the road to success.
The deciding factor won't just be the level of service, because competitors like Amazon are good in that area, but the price. What price will these products be sold at?
A quick look reveals earbuds like these €20 cheaper than on Amazon. However, this combination fridge-freezer is €100 more expensive than can be seen on the website of a French rival.
Every day we look at the price of fridge freezers, but still.
Interesting to see, Yuka. Thanks so much for that. You go away there with all the day's business news.
The latest generation fighter jets, refueling tankers in their dozens, a massive naval deployment including 2 aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln, seen here, and the Gerald R, both along with a fleet of destroyers and frigates. These are the US forces deployed to the Middle East and taking part in the strikes on Iran, offensive reinforcements for the ongoing war. They're for defense, too, of the major US military presence in and around the region and all its infrastructure. That's been a priority target for Iranian attacks since the beginning of the conflict. But the US has had a footprint in the Middle East since long before shots were fired in the latest war, in allied nations like Qatar, which has stood by its commitments despite coming under repeated Iranian bombardment.
The strategic partnership, not only with the US, but all of our defense partners in the world, is not up for question. We have taken the decision to strategically ally ourselves in this way as part of a wider regional security framework.
Built in 1996, Qatar hosts the Al Udeid Air Base, the home of CENTCOM, US Central Command of its Middle Eastern forces since 2006. It's a major hub for refueling aircraft, bombers and troop transports, not to mention airborne reconnaissance and surveillance, and around 10,000 personnel. There's a similar contingent in nearby Bahrain, but this one for naval forces, present since 1948. The US Fifth Fleet's headquarters is at one of the archipelago's ports, where deep water allows all kinds of vessels to dock. The US Air Force and Navy are also allowed access to bases in Oman. And in the United Arab Emirates, the Al Dhafra base supports aerial operations, including combat Reaper drones. Kuwait also has its share of Reapers, with barracks hosting different US Army Corps. 13,000 troops make it the largest contingent in the region. It's also where the first 6 US service members died in the conflict on March 1st. Saudi Arabia only hosts 2,300 personnel, mostly at Prince Sultan Base. It's home to both Patriot interceptor missiles and the THAAD high-altitude defense system, both tied into Saudi air defense. It's a partnership with the Gulf monarchies that goes hand in hand with trade relations, as Donald Trump's visit last year demonstrated.
This is a record tour. There's never been a tour that will raise, it could be a total of $3.5, $4 trillion. This just in this 4 or 5 days.
Iraqis remember all too keenly US forces' occupation of their nation from 2003 to 2011, and just one base remains now. In the north, close to Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. Tehran's drones and pro-Iranian Shia factions have repeatedly targeted it since the beginning of the war. The US military pulled out of the Ain al-Assad base in the western Al-Anbar province earlier this year. It played a key role in the struggle against the Islamic State group over the border in Syria, itself hosting US units in the same fight, along with the use of Jordan's Muwafaq Salti airbase. Other sites retain an air of secrecy, such as a surveillance facility in Israel, an observation post in the Egyptian Sinai, or Incirlik Air Base in Turkey that can handle nuclear-capable bombers. Finally, the United States can also field a projection force from the Horn of Africa, which is based in Djibouti's Camp Lemonnier. The US has left a sizable footprint across the Middle East, one that links the destiny of each hosting nation to geopolitical choices made in Washington and to the anger of Tehran and its regional proxies.